to Tofino and the latest on the weekend floatplane crash near Ahousat that killed 4 people. The Transportation Safety Board says the float plane hit the ocean with its nose down and its engine running. Crews today raised the wreckage of the aircraft that went down Saturday on the short 12-minute flight from Tofino to Ahousat. The victims' bodies were recovered Sunday. Today, the remains of the Cessna 185 were lifted onto a barge in several pieces and then taken to Tofino. The aircraft had recently undergone an overhaul. Investigators are trying to determine why the pilot from Tofino lost control of the float plane. The damage done to the aircraft does give them a few clues.
Damage to the propeller and that area would suggest that there was power when the aircraft hit the water. So on contact, the damage is consistent with the engine operating. Often these aircraft, the floats rip off or the wings rip off, but the tail is broken off on this one, which would suggest a higher impact or angles that are not often seen during takeoff and landing.
The TSB confirms that the 3 passengers from Ahousat had been drinking alcohol before boarding the plane, but investigators say the aircraft did not have dual flight controls and they do not believe that the passengers were in a position to have affected the operation of the aircraft or the crash. Would those victims have survived, though, if they had been wearing life jackets, or could they even have escaped the sinking plane? Those are questions that have been asked all too many times in British Columbia following other floatplane crashes, but nothing seems to change. And some wonder tonight if the province needs to take more of a role in regulating coastal aviation. A News reporter Shachi Curl has that part of the story.
Damon York, Edward Sam, Katrina Sam English, and Samantha Mattersdorfer were more than statistics before the crash that took their lives on Saturday. They were loved by their families. They had hopes and dreams. Still, their names are now added to a grim 55-person list of those killed in floatplane accidents in BC since 1994.
It's devastating, and everybody, like I say, everybody knows the victims.
So much of the tragedy concentrated on Vancouver Island and coastal BC communities. In March 2005, a de Havilland Beaver crashed off of Quadra Island, killing 5 men from Campbell River. When the wreckage was pulled up months later, it was clear none of the victims had life jackets on. August 2008, a Grumman Goose float plane crashes on northern Vancouver Island. 5 are killed, 2 survived. And last November, 6 more die in a Sea Air de Havilland Beaver near Lyle Harbour. In all that time, the Transportation Safety Board has recommended life jackets be worn on board. And in all that time, Transport Canada has failed to do anything about it.
Is there a sense of frustration here?
There is when you see another accident that lives could have been saved by that action. In this case, we can't say that yet.
But as investigators begin the search for answers in the wreckage of a raised plane, questions are being raised about whether the BC government is putting enough pressure on Ottawa to make change. Aviation is a federal responsibility, but 97% of floatplane takeoffs and landings happen in coastal BC.
Well, of course we're concerned. I think that from our perspective, we have to remember that it is federal jurisdiction.
We need to make it clear to Ottawa that when there are safety recommendations that have been made, that they're followed through on and that they're acted upon.
The federal government is also going to convene a meeting here in September, I believe, in Vancouver, and it's important that British Columbia have a key role in that discussion.
But while concern for tighter safety regulations are the talk of the legislature, the industry itself isn't convinced that more needs to be done. Weather and Winds grounded Harbour Air's fleet today. The company's senior vice president says that represents real safety.
Well, we're working with agencies like Viking Air, like the doors on the Beaver aircraft, and again, we're all for improvement.
Harbour Air says if Transport Canada orders changes, the company will obey. And it may turn out that neither life jackets nor anything else the Transportation Safety Board has called for in the past would have saved those on board this time. Still, one wonders how many more accidents will claim how many more lives. In Victoria, Shachi Curl, A News.
And there is a further development. Late this afternoon, the federal government did respond to accusations of foot dragging. Transportation Minister John Baird says he is asking his staff to immediately begin looking at the possibility of making pop-out windows and wearing life jackets mandatory on board float planes. No indication when or if that may ultimately happen.